Choosing the right soldering iron for jewelry making does not have to be a grueling, difficult task. I'm going to teach you everything that you need to know to choose a soldering iron for jewelry making. Now, before we get started, the type of jewelry making I'm talking about is soft solder. And what that is, it's similar to stained glass solder, but it does not contain lead. This is lead-free solder, which is usually a mix of silver and tin and copper. The solder that is used for stained glass making, obviously it's a tin and lead solder. You never want to use that for jewelry making because it's poisonous. So we use lead-free solder. And one of the most important things I could tell you to get started is you need a soldering iron that is able to get very hot. So soldering irons come in different wattages: 60 watt, 80 watt, 40 watt, 20 watt, 100 watt. You want to look for a 100 watt soldering iron, and even an 80 watt soldering iron should be able to go up to the temperatures you need, because lead-free solder will melt at a higher temperature than lead solder, the kind we don't want to use, right? But we are using a soldering iron for melting metal. And if you go to like a big box craft store, sometimes they will have like a stained glass section and you'll see a soldering iron there, and you will go home and you will not be able to get that soldering iron hot. They're very, very low wattage soldering irons. So irons can be purchased online on Amazon. As a matter of fact, I will leave some links below. Stained glass retailers and soldering irons are made for different industries. There are different types of soldering irons. And the kind of soldering iron that you want to get for jewelry making is the type that you would get for stained glass. They also make soldering irons for the electronics industry. Now, I'm going to show you the ones I have here. I have a couple different kinds. There's one type that I do not have. The kind I'm going to show you, this is called like a pencil style, right? Looks like a pencil or a pen. You use it like this. There's also one that has like a pistol grip, and I don't like that one. It gives you a lot of fatigue when you're using it. Another thing that I want you to know is that I use an electric soldering iron. Most people do. An electric soldering iron will maintain its temperature. If you use a soldering iron that takes like butane, you can purchase they're like gimmicky. They come up every few years. You'll see like, oh, it's a butane soldering iron, and you can fill it. You'll run out of butane. It's kind of a pain. So get an electric soldering iron. So the one that I have here is one I've used for many, many years. This one isn't made anymore. It's kind of a generic 100 watt iron. And the other types of soldering irons are made for the electronics industry. Now, those soldering irons will come with usually different types of tips, like fancy tips, pointed tips. There's like the conical, and then there's like a chisel tip, and there's a half chisel tip. And those tips are specifically made for when they do electronics repair, circuit boards. They have to get into like really small areas, and that's what those tips are for. And you can use some of those tips for doing some fancy decorative soldering, but really they're not the best thing to use. So I'll show you mine. This was probably the first one I ever had, and then I bought another one and they lasted me a really long time, probably 10 years each, because I've been soft soldering for probably 30 years. So, and then I'm on my third one. I did have a Weller in between there, and it didn't have a high enough wattage, and I realized it was one that came with this is a rheostat, and I was turning it up to get the high temperatures, and like the tips were burning out very quickly. So that one just didn't work for me, but that is a good brand name. They have a lot of different wattage irons. Here's one that you can get really inexpensively online from Amazon. And this is a really lightweight, it's a cheap iron. It's $20 or something. And these aren't the kind that I really recommend for anyone who wants to do like heavy duty jewelry making soldering. But you know what? For starting out, if you're not sure, before you make an investment in like a really good iron that might cost you $100, you can get one of these, and you know what? It does the trick. It does the trick. It'll work long enough for you to learn how to solder. And the next thing I want to teach you is the temperature control. Now, this kind of iron has a temperature control built into the handle. Many irons do. This one has like a digital display, and it'll let you choose Fahrenheit or Celsius, and it heats up very quickly. It'll show you when you plug it in and turn it on, how it, how fast it gets hot, and it'll show you the temperature on here. And that's a nice thing to have. I've heard that these types with the built-in, sometimes this will stop working and then you're kind of stuck. I have always used the type of iron that has an external rheostat. Now, there was one that I used for many, many years, and then it finally gave up and I got rid of it. And for the time being, I've been using this one. And what this does is you plug your soldering iron into this and you turn it on, and then you can adjust the temperature. And a lot of people ask me, what temperature do I set my soldering iron at? Every soldering iron is different. You need to experiment. You need to turn it up and solder. You need to turn it down and solder, and you need to see how it acts for you. So that is a question that I just cannot answer. People will constantly ask it, and I understand. It can be frustrating sometimes when you're starting out learning how to solder. You want to do it right away. It is something that takes time and practice and repetition and more practice. But you will learn after a while what temperature to set your iron at. But this is an example of a rheostat. And this is the same thing, it's just built into the handle. So when you buy a soldering iron like this that doesn't have anything on it, and let's say this is a 100-watt iron. Well, let's say I want to take this iron and I want to just do it at 80 watts. Well, I can't change the temperature of this. This is always going to go up to 100 watts unless I buy one of these and I plug the iron into here, and then I can adjust the temperature and I can turn it down. So you need to have a rheostat. That's definitely something you want, whether you have an external one or whether you have one that's built into the soldering iron. Now, like I said, there's like two main different types of styles of soldering irons. There's like a pistol grip soldering iron and then the pencil. I like the pencil just to show you. There are different insides to these irons. Some of them heat differently. This has like a collar. You unscrew this only when it's cold. Don't ever touch it when it's hot. This gets very, very hot, the tip all the way down. And you unscrew this and you can see this is ceramic. This is a ceramic heating element. And you want to keep this snugged on here, not too tight, but keep it snug. And you'll find sometimes when you're soldering and you're turning your iron on to work and then you turn it off and then you go back another day and you're soldering, sometimes this gets loose from the metal expanding and contracting. So you want to make sure it's like a little bit snug on there before you start soldering. Another thing is the tips. When I first started, I was a stained glass artist, so I had a good old standard soldering iron that had like 1/4 inch tip. And when we measure a soldering iron tip, we're measuring the width of a little end of it, right? So usually about 1/4 inch or 1/8 of an inch is a good size tip. And I taught myself how to do all the decorative, and I have a book on decorative soldering coming out next year, or probably in 2025, it'll be out. And I explain that in there, that when I learned how to solder and then decorative solder and then solder with lead-free solder and jewelry, I learned it all with a good old 1/4 inch big fat soldering iron tip that was made for stained glass. And then I went down and got like a 1/4 inch to 1/8 inch, and that was a little bit better. They have pros and cons. Obviously, with a larger tip, you're going to be able to heat a larger area. A smaller tip, you won't, but you can get into smaller spaces. Yeah, so this is basically just the one tip I use on this. I don't change it out. I've tried other tips. Now, this soldering iron, which is, like I said, this is the inexpensive one from Amazon, and like, I do recommend this iron. I recommend this iron. I haven't had any trouble with it. I bought one for my daughter. My other daughter uses it to solder. They don't solder like I do all the time, but it's a great iron to start with. So if you maybe bought one of my soldering iron books and you're just getting started, like, this is a decent iron to start with. And I'll link that down below. Now, if you don't know me, I am the author of the book Boho Chic Jewelry and Soldered Alchemy and Soldering Iron Jewelry, which I really recommend this one. If you really want to learn how to solder and like you don't know, like really you're just starting out, this book is like the guide. Definitely a great book. And then my most recent release just from a month or two ago is the Broken China Jewelry book. And this has soldering projects in it, but it also has projects that are made with broken china where you don't solder. But anyway, So yeah, I have a lot of experience with soldering. I am the owner of a broken china jewelry business called Dish Functional Designs. I've had that for probably close to 30 years. And that's just the background on me if we haven't met before. But getting back to soldering irons, this iron, let me see if I have the tips here. Let's see. Oh, that's a 1/4 inch. So here's a 1/4 inch tip. Do you see how wide that tip is? And then here's like an 1/8 of an inch tip. So you can see the difference, right? I learned how to solder and do all my decorative soldering with this size tip. I don't have the tips that go with that lightweight iron right here, but I do have this other one that I found in my workshop, and I'll show you. This is a Weller. It's just made for their irons. Sometimes if you buy a certain soldering iron, it'll only take like that brand's tips. Other ones will take interchangeable ones, like kind of like a generic one. But this is one that's like, check that out. Look at that. That's really tiny. That is like, that's almost like a needle tip. That's really small. Now this is for electronics. Now you can solder with this for like, you know, jewelry making, and you might be able to do like little tiny spots with it or something. But these types of tips and this type of iron, they're not made for like really long soldering. When you're sitting and you're making jewelry, you're going to be sitting for longer, much longer periods of time than you are when you're doing like little electronic repairs here and there. So you want to get, I guess, a heftier tip, like a stronger tip. I would think sometimes these probably would burn out with the amount of use that you would need to use it for jewelry making. I definitely recommend more of an 1/8 of an inch tip. I think that works best. So getting back to buying a soldering iron, you want to get a soldering iron from a reputable source. You want to avoid one from a big box craft store. Go to either Amazon, like I said, I'll have some recommendations below, or go to a stained glass retailer. There are all different wattages of irons. Make sure that if you're going to make jewelry, you use lead-free solder. You need a higher wattage iron. You need 80 watt or above. I recommend a 100 watt iron. That way you will be able to manipulate that iron to different temperatures up high, so you can make that solder molten. You can make different decorative designs, and the solder, when you get it, it's in a spool and it's like a solid state. And then when it gets heated a little bit, it gets like a pasty state. And then when it gets really hot, to be flowing and like you can make it nice and smooth, that's like the molten liquid state. So you want to make sure that you have an iron. And if you get a low, let's say you go to a big box store and you get this, bring the soldering iron home, and it's like a 20 watt iron or even a 40 watt iron, you're going to be trying to melt that, and it's going to be pasty, and you're going to get points and peaks, and like those are fine sometimes if you want them, but most of the time you don't. You want a nice smooth, kind of like, they call it a bead. You want a nice smooth bead to start with. So in buying a soldering iron for jewelry making, the most important thing, be able to adjust your temperature. So get one that has a rheostat either built into the handle or an external one. Get an iron that is 80 to, I'd say, 100 watt if you can find one. Those are the best. And you don't have to spend a ton. Like I said, you can get started. This, I think, is an 80 or 100 watt iron. It was like $20. And came with tips. It came with a little thing of like a soldering wire, which I will not use because it does not say what it is. I think it might be lead. And it came with some kind of a rosin, which is like a flux, which I will not use because, again, it came from overseas. It didn't have like all the ingredients in. So I prefer to use, you know, what I know and what I buy here in the United States. I buy Novacan liquid flux for stained glass is the one I like. And you can even water it down a little bit. You could try that and see how that works for you. But I hope this helped. I'm trying to think if I missed anything. Yeah, I would not get get an electric iron because, like I said, if you're sitting in your jewelry making, you're not just going to sit there for 5 minutes. You're going to sit there for quite a while. At least I hope you sit there for quite a while and work on your jewelry. And you want something that's going to maintain its temperature. You don't want it to get really hot and then get cool, or you're going to be frustrated. You're going to be soldering and be like, oh, I'm going to quit because I can't get it right. And in the beginning, when you're soldering and you're learning, you know, it is trial and error. I mean, you can't give up. You have to keep going. But definitely 100 watt iron, get a rheostat, try to get about an 1/8 of an inch tip. 1/4 inch is probably a little big for jewelry making, but to start with, you know, it's good. And yeah, I guess that's about it. Here's one last thing I can show you. Here are some old soldering iron tips that I found on my workbench. And let's see, this is like the 1/4 inch, right? That's the one I learned like to make stained glass with. And then I believe this one is the 1/8 of an inch, and you can see they're rusty and they're corroded, right? But you can see the difference in the size of those two, right? And then I tried to use one that was smaller, and this one is about, is it 3/16? It's about half the size of the 1/8. You can see how like thin it is, whatever. Well, guess what? They didn't last me long, and they kept corroding. And look at this. I have to set these other ones down. I have two that are really corroded. And you could see it couldn't handle the high temperature, I think, that I needed to use it at. And like the working at long periods of time. So yeah, I quit those, and I really like the 1/8 of an inch. Or, yeah. So anyway, I hope that helped, and I hope that you can find yourself a good soldering iron. And they're all different types, and there are, you know, real expensive irons that you kind of really don't need. There are expensive ones that they'll last you a long time, like if you're really serious and you want to make stained glass or you want to make soldered jewelry, then you definitely get a good iron. One last thing before I go, I just wanted to show you, this is one of my pieces of broken china jewelry. I made this one many years ago. I go really, really in detail with the broken china jewelry book. So this is available right now. And if you want to learn how to make broken china jewelry out of all different kinds of materials and with different tools, you should check that out. I hope this helped, and I'll be back again soon with a new video. I have some ideas turning. If there's anything you want to know, leave me a question below. What would you like to see a video on? And I will see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe. Bye, guys.